One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Today's podcast episode goes out to all of you that have some mindset issues. And I've mentioned this here before, but I feel like I've become a podcast therapist, right? So like come into my office, sit down on my comfy couch, because we're about to get real with something that a lot of people have this fear, but no one really talks about it. No one verbalizes it. At least I don't see people talking about this in podcast communities, including my own, but I'm going to out some of you today, and we're going to talk about that fear of launching your podcast and nobody listening. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So the title I had for today's episode, like literally I'm looking at it in my content calendar, and it was a little bit harsher than what I decided to go with, but this is where the initial concept came from. And it says, and I quote, "What if I suck and nobody listens?" End quote. So this is actually something that I have had asked to me in like private coaching calls. I've heard this from my students. It's like once we've uncovered like some of the reasons. So if you listen to last episode, we talked about 4 reasons why you really haven't started your podcast. And there were a lot of unpacking of excuses. And basically I gave you all the information you needed to really get started with your show. Like we stripped away so many of the excuses of, I don't know what software, I don't know what equipment. Like once you get past all of that, this is one of the biggest things that holds people back from getting started with their podcast. They're like, what if I suck and nobody listens to my show? Like this is a legitimate fear. Like I'm not telling you this as someone who from the very beginning was so confident and just said, you know what? I'm going to start this podcast thing and I know I'm going to be successful. I know it's going to be popular. I know. No, that is not how my podcast journey started either. I had this same fear. I was just like, oh my gosh, I told all these people about this show and it's coming, right? My launch date is coming and I'm going to put it out there. But what if nobody listens? What if I put it out there and I have like 2 downloads and that's it? Like this is a legitimate fear. And I think that it comes from, as human beings, we look for validation. Okay, like let's just be real honest. I'm not actually a therapist of any kind. I think I took 2 classes of like psychology in college. I really don't even remember. It was kind of fun. It was just interesting to see how the mind works, but I don't really understand the nuances of where fear is based out of and everything like that. Like I'm not going to pretend like I'm some kind of guru that can really speak to how we behave as human beings. I can only talk to you about my actual fears that I've had along this podcast journey. And I can tell you that this is a valid mindset. I don't even want to call it a fear anymore because it's more of a mindset. And once you start seeing it that way, you can kind of remove yourself from the equation. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, I've been listening to a lot of famous people lately. I was actually listening to Paul McCartney, right? The Beatles, Paul McCartney. He was on a podcast recently and he talked about how he separated himself, like Paul, the guy, just some guy, Paul, from who he is as Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles. And he said when he did that, it helped him really understand who he was as a person better. And like, it's like it relieved some of those expectations that maybe other people had put on him or he had put on himself from early on in his career. And I think that that's what, like anybody that's a content creator, that's how they should approach these mindset shifts that we all have to make because we all have them, right? Whether it's imposter syndrome, like we need to be validated that we're on the right track, or we're just terrified that we're going to put something out there and no one's going to listen. I want you to think about it this way. I want you to think about separating yourself, right? You as the host and then you as the producer of the show, even if you do both. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, this podcast, as of right now, as of me recording this, I am the sole producer, host, creator of everything on this podcast. I edit everything. I plan everything. I create it. I do all of these things. But my success as a podcaster isn't 100% reliant on just one piece of the puzzle. Does that make sense? It's kind of like you have to remove yourself in certain aspects from the content that you're creating. Because I got to tell you, as much as I love podcasting, I love talking about it and all the things, if my podcast was a total flop, it wouldn't change my identity as a person, right? Like it wouldn't mean that I'm a terrible mom, I'm a terrible wife, I'm a terrible daughter, sister, friend, all those things, just because my podcast wasn't as successful as I thought it was going to be, right? Because we all have big aspirations. I know so many of you want that chart-topping podcast where people are banging down the doors saying, we want to sponsor you. We want to be a guest on your show. We want you to come on our show. Like all the things, like those are kind of the reality TV kind of dreams of podcasting. And I say that just to pick on reality TV shows because I don't really watch them. But it's just like everyone wants this persona of being taken seriously. And I think that the opposite end of that spectrum is that person that's saying, what if I suck and nobody listens to my show? So I want you to remove yourself from this equation, like you as the podcaster and you as a person are two totally different things, because even if you launch your show and it sucks, okay, I use that term like in quotes, it sucks to your standards, to someone else's standards, so what?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
So what, did you die? No, you didn't die just because no one listened to your podcast. And I can say that with confidence because I've launched a book that no one wanted to read. I have gone to events to speak where one person showed up. Like, I have done the things where you feel like, oh my God, I suck and no one wants to hear what I have to say. But the truth of the matter is that I just needed to adjust my message. So this is coming from my experience, again, because I can only tell you from my fears, my journey, and everything that I've gone on since I started my entire journey. Like whenever I first stopped like working in the corporate world, I started staying at home with my kids. I started exploring public speaking, writing, blogging, like going on these just different paths. And what I learned is if I fail at any of those, it doesn't make me less of a person. It doesn't mean that I suck as a person. It just means like I wasn't a successful blogger because I don't like blogging. Like, let's just be real, like cat's out of the bag. That is not my area of expertise. I have to interrupt real fast because I have another incredible podcast that I want to share with you here today. You see, I've mentioned this before, but I've got to give a shout out to the members of the Potty People community because y'all are doing some amazing things. And today, I want to spotlight Amy. Amy has a podcast called Take Heart, and her podcast is all about joy, connection, and hope for special needs moms. So if you find yourself the parent of a special needs child, then I encourage you to go check out this podcast. She launched her podcast recently, and the number one takeaway that she says her listeners will get from listening to this podcast is encouragement. And because I wanted to go see what was actually going on over at the Take Heart podcast, I wanted to read you this review. So this is from Apple Podcast. It says, thankful for the encouragement. I love how, although each mom has their own journey in the special needs world, their feelings and experiences are completely relatable. I find myself often saying, yes, that's exactly how I felt. Definitely subscribe to this one. So I just want you to join me in congratulating Amy in launching her podcast and really making that connection with her audience. Be sure to join us in the Profit Podcast online community and give Amy a shout out for her podcast. I'm so excited. Amy, we are rooting for you. I can't wait to see what amazing things you do with the Take Heart podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about the Potty People, then you can go to thepottypeople.com and check us out and see the awesome things that we're doing. Okay, let's get back to the episode. And so if you're like, I'm just so terrified that my podcast is going to go out there and it's going to suck, well, let's evaluate that. Why do you feel that way? Is it because you're like, I'm just not a great editor? Well, awesome. Hire out your editing. Don't do it anymore. I do my editing because I enjoy it. It's easy for me. But if you're like, the editing, like it terrifies me. I can't sound very well. Whenever I do it, I feel like it's so choppy because I do like all these things. Hire out the editing. I can't even talk. Hire out the editing. Hire an editor and don't worry about that anymore. But if you are so worried about this standard of, I have to be just like this other podcaster, or I need to have 10,000 downloads in my first month, otherwise I'm a loser. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't always share the stats of everything that's going on, but I've been podcasting with the Potty Report. This is my daily show for 9 months, and I still have not hit 10,000 downloads on that podcast in 9 months. We are just a little over 6,000 downloads with that podcast. So I can tell you from someone that does podcasting and teaches podcasting, and literally this is all I talk about all the time, the numbers aren't everything. So stop getting so wrapped up in this let's go back to the beginning, right? The question is, what if I suck and nobody listens? What is the quote unquote definition of suck? How could your podcast suck? And for a lot of people, I think it's the download numbers. And I've listened to lots of episodes of Buzzcast. So Buzzcast is Buzzsprout's podcast. It's usually Kevin, who is one of the co-founders of the company, Albin, who is the head of marketing over there, and Travis, who's the head of content. And they talk about numbers and they talk about their Buzzsprout users. And it's so interesting to listen to their data because you realize somebody may be gushing about all their downloads and all this stuff, but then you listen to Buzzcast and then you find out, oh, a lot of people overinflate their numbers to make it sound like they actually have more downloads than they do. Therefore, other people hear those numbers and they think, oh my gosh, I only have 30 downloads an episode. I must be doing terrible. No, you're not. No, you're not. You can actually go back. There was a recent post. You can go to the Profit Podcast Online Community. That's our Facebook group. And I shared stats from Buzzsprout. And they started doing this. I think that they started in November. They shared October stats for all of their users. And you can see the average number of people that or average number of downloads that people are getting on their podcast. And they break it down by over a certain period of time or how many listens they get in a week. They break down, if you get this many downloads, you're in the top 50%. If you get this many, you're in the top 75, and so on and so forth. And it's not as many as you would think. This is what I want to let everybody know that are if you are listening to this and you are so worried about putting something out there and only 10 people are going to listen to your podcast, I got to tell you, I would love it if the very first time I ever went out to do a public speaking gig, 10 people showed up and they were hanging on my every word. Y'all, that would be everything. Because I got to be honest, I've been on stages in front of hundreds of people and I could be talking, but then I can see very clearly out in the crowd, there's people looking at their phone. Or there's people talking to the person next to them. Or there's someone that's kind of halfway in the door, halfway out, not fully paying attention to everything that you're saying. So just because if you're oh, I wish I was on a stage somewhere, that doesn't mean that you have an engaged audience. But if you have 10 people that are intentionally pressing play on your podcast and listening to the entire thing, that's gold. In 2020, in this year of podcast and people just being so all over the place with content and being distracted and multitasking when they're doing all kinds of different things, if you can get 10 people to listen to your podcast every single week, then you don't suck. Okay, like let's change the definition. Let's go back to what we were talking about earlier. Let's separate that mindset of, oh, I suck because I only have 10 people. No, that means that you are starting with an audience of 10 people. Now you have a baseline for growing your audience in the future. But first, you have to connect with these people. It's like so many people are worried about, how do I get to my first 100,000 downloads or my first 1,000,000 downloads on my podcast? And I'm like, hold up, wait a minute. Why don't we just get you to your first 100 downloads before you decide whether your podcast is good or bad? Why don't we get you to the 15th episode? Because, and I know I've said this before, but I know I tell people in the Potty People all the time, like our membership community, I say, look, y'all, if you can just get to that 15th episode, you are golden. And the reason why is there was a study done, I guess it was 2 years ago. The Nielsen Group did like this big survey of podcasters and like all these like dead podcasts that were just floating out there in Apple Podcasts. And it was so interesting because there were so many podcasts that weren't publishing on a regular basis, and most of them stopped at around 13 or 14. And so it was like a crazy number. It wasn't like, it was like, oh, there's like 4. No, it was like hundreds of podcasts that stopped around episode 13 or 14. So I always tell my people, if you can just get to that 15th episode, right? Like then you're getting over the first hurdle. That's usually the biggest hurdle, is like, if you can find your groove, if you can lock in that topic that you know your audience wants to hear, if you can start talking about those content pieces that are crucial, if you can understand your audience, if you can figure out your marketing, then you are golden. But if you do all of those things and you still only have 10 listeners, by definition, that does not mean your podcast sucks, okay? It does not mean your podcast sucks. So I do want to wrap up this episode because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of anyone thinking that their podcast sucks. If you are putting out podcast content, my friend, you are a podcaster, okay? And as a group of people, we don't suck. Like, I'm just going to collectively say that. We do not suck. Podcasters are awesome because we have important messages to share with our communities. We have messages that are inspiring, that are motivating, that are going to help people. It's going to save them time, save them money, save their marriage, help them be a better parent, help them be a better daughter, help them take care of their aging parents, help them train their dogs, help them bake beautiful cakes. Like, I know all of these crazy ideas that y'all have for your podcast, but some of you are sitting in this fear of, but what if it's not good enough? And what if it's just not helpful enough? What if I put this out and nobody listens? And I'm going to tell you right now that I want you to join the Profit Podcast online community, because every single Wednesday, I put up a post in that group and I say, hey, post your latest episode. This is your opportunity to get in front of more than that one person that you think may or may not listen to your show, right? It's usually the mom. It's usually your mom, right? Or your grandma. You're like, well, I put this out there and my grandma's going to listen to it. At least someone's listening to it. Well, I invite you to join our community of podcasters because we cheer each other on. Like I said, we know, like we are legit in there and we are cheering everybody on. We know we don't suck. You don't see anybody in there that's saying, oh my gosh, I suck. We suck as podcasters. No, we are cheering other people on. We are asking questions. We're getting answers. We're getting feedback on our artwork. Like, it's just basically a big party in there because that's the type of podcasting mindset I want to create. I want to be rippling out, reverberating out into the universe. Is podcasting is awesome. Podcasting is fun. Podcasting is a way for you to reach other people with the message that you have, because I could compare myself to a million other people on this planet, but there's still just one me. There's only one person who has the crazy, zany personality that I have. There's only one person who is obsessed with Friends and The Office the way that I am. There's only one person who has had the life experiences that I can share on this podcast. There is only one person who knows what it's like to be a stay-at-home mom and then decide to create an online business with 3 kids at home, not really sure what she was doing, but she's making it happen because that person is me. And I'm the only one that can share the important message that I have, just like you. You are the only one that can share your message. And I want to help you do that. I want to see you creating content this year, the next year, and beyond. Like, we're talking way beyond that 15th episode that you need to create to get over that first hurdle, right? We are talking about, I want to create podcasters for life. You know, I know that it's a relatively new platform. It hasn't been around for 50 years, but podcasting is here to stay. And I want to see you create a podcast that you are confident about. You're like, I don't care if you never listen to my show, but my show doesn't suck. Okay. I know what confidence, it may not be for you, right? Like, someone could say, oh, Crystal's podcast sucks. And I say, well, it's not meant for you. If you don't like it, then you don't get it. Let me say that again for the people in the back. If you don't like it, then you don't get it. Okay? And adopt that motto. If you are struggling with this mindset right now, you need to tell yourself over and over again, if they don't like it, they don't get it. Because that's really what it all comes down to. And that is like, and I'm not like a huge fan of having like canned responses, but you can steal that one. If someone's like, oh, you know, your podcast sucks, you don't know what you're talking about, which, by the way, I've never gotten an email like that, though that was one of my fears whenever I first started. I wish that I would have had the confidence to say that to someone if they ever said, Crystal, your podcast sucks. I would say, you know what? If you don't like it, then you don't get it. This show is not for you. Please move on with your life. Go find another podcast because there are tons out there, and I only want to talk to people that want to hear from me. Oh, man. That was a doozy, y'all. I got a little heated. I'm sweating, and I'm just like, this is what needed to happen. This needed to come out. There was a reason why, and I wrote, it's really funny because I'm still staring at my content calendar, and it literally says, what if I suck and nobody listens? I think that I took this from a podcast community where someone asked this question. It wasn't my community. It was a different community. And I thought, what a powerful question, that if there's one person out there that has that question, then there's probably 50 more that need to hear the same message that we shared here today. So again, you don't suck. You don't suck. By definition, if you're a podcaster, then you are as cool as, and it's funny, I'm like, I just completely like drew a blank. Because see, this is, I'm not cool as other people, but I'm as cool as a podcaster can get. Okay? Like, if you're hanging out here, you are amongst cool people. And I highly encourage you to come join us in the Profit Podcast community. Because if you're looking for a community of podcasters to hang out with, we have fun in there. We cheer each other on. We encourage each other, and we want to see each other succeed. And now I'm going to share with you. Okay, I've said this twice today, so it's like everything comes in threes. So I'm like, I gotta say this because this is one of my big audacious goals for 2021. I want to see our community of podcasters within the Profit Podcast community. I want to see us all collectively hit 1 million downloads in 2021. It makes me uncomfortable. It kind of scares me a little bit to say that out loud, but I want to see your podcast succeed, and I believe that we can do that. That sounds really scary. That sounds really crazy. It sounds crazy big, audacious to say, what? 1 million downloads in 1 year? But I think we can do it. I think if we all encourage each other and we push each other and we just let each other know, like, hey, I got your back. Like, you don't suck. First of all, we're going to tell everybody, like, collectively, we're going to hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and say, we don't suck. We don't suck. Sorry, the cheerleader in me comes out from time to time. There's a little taste of it, but I just want you to know I am so excited that you're here. If you're listening to this podcast, you don't suck, okay? And I want you to keep going. And I don't want you to worry about what happens if nobody listens, because things will get better. If you launch and no one listens, that's just an opportunity for you to shift things around in your podcast. That's an opportunity for you to change your message. And that's also an opportunity for you to say, if they don't like it, they don't get it. They don't get it. But that's all I have for you today. Oh my gosh, this was just like all over the place. It was exactly what I needed. I'm fired up. Like, I feel like, I was just on stage in front of a ton of people, and that's the kind of energy I have today. And I hope that whoever needed to hear this message, it gets through to you today, because you don't suck, my friend. Okay? You do not suck. And I cannot wait to see what you create in 2020, 2021, and beyond. So go check out the show notes for this episode and join us in our free Facebook group, the Profit Podcast online community. The show notes for this episode, crystalprofit.com/213. And if this is your first time tuning in, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, this was a doozy of an episode to listen to for the very first time, but I'm so glad that you're here. So here are your next steps. Make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you are listening. And I would love it if you would give us a rating and a review. Anytime you leave those, it helps push this content out in front of more potential podcasters that have those special messages to share just like you. But again, the show notes for this episode are crystalprofit.com/episode 213. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.